Welcome to rePROs Fight Back, a podcast on all things related to sexual and reproductive health rights and justice. Hi, rePROs. How's everybody doing? I'm your host, Jenny Wetter, and my pronouns are she, her. So, y'all, it is September already. How did that happen? I don't really know where this summer went. It went by in a flash, and I feel like I didn't get out and enjoy it as much as I should have. But that's okay, because I am actually really a fall girl. I love when it starts to get cool out. I love apples and like pumpkin pie spice things, and I just apparently am very much a fall girl. Love it. Ready for spooky season and for spooky season reads, for an apple crisp. I'm excited already. Even though I've not had any of those things yet, I am ready. I am recording this early, so hopefully I'm coming off a very restful and relaxing long weekend. My goal is to take Friday off and have a nice chill 4-day weekend to just relax, do some reading, and just have a quiet recharge before I get into the fall, where things are going to start to get hectic with the end of the fiscal year coming up for the government, and trying to make sure that we see good repro funding things happening. And yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed, right? So rest and recharge before that battle. I'm ready. And then ramping up for, I think, kind of a busy-ish fall. There's some things coming that I'm really excited to share with y'all, but we're not quite there yet. But stay tuned, because there will be some fun announcements coming. I can't wait. But yeah, I'm really excited for what is to come this fall. So with that, I think we're ready to just turn to this week's episode. And before we get there, I just want to give a trigger warning. We are going to be talking about domestic violence and intimate partner violence, particularly reproductive violence or reproductive coercion. So if you are not in a place to listen to that right now, listen to this later, or we'll see you next week or in 2 weeks for another episode. Just do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And if you need a resource, make sure that you reach out to the Domestic Violence Support Hotline. You can find them at thehotline.org, or you can call them if you need someone to talk to at 1-800-799-SAFE. And they also have a chat feature available on their website. Or you can do text to talk, and that's text START to 88788. So they're a great resource. Reach out to them if you need somebody to talk to. So this week, as I said, we're going to be talking about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, by talking about the rise in reproductive violence that we have seen since Post-Dobbs. And I am very excited to have with me today Marium Durrani with the National Domestic Violence Hotline to talk to us about this. So with that, let's turn to my interview with Marium. Hi, Marium. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, before we get started, do you want to do a quick introduction and include your pronouns?
Sure. My name is Marium Durrani. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Vice President of Policy at the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
I'm very excited to have you here today to talk about this rise in reproductive violence we're seeing post-Dobbs, but I thought maybe a good place to start would be taking some steps back. I know I was young and experienced intimate partner violence and wasn't aware of this whole range of violence that is considered domestic violence, intimate partner violence, whatever you want to call it. And, I didn't come to see the violence I experienced until much later, when I started doing this repro work and started to talk about these issues, and was like, oh, all of these red flags I didn't see or didn't realize. And so I think it would be really helpful to start there. So what is domestic violence, intimate partner violence?
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you are able to share your experience, and so glad that you've able to heal and recognize what situation you're in. Domestic violence, also known as inter-partner violence, sometimes relationship abuse, all those terms are sometimes interchangeable. Lots of times people feel like one resonates with them more than the other. Typically, we identify all of those as a pattern of behavior used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner. So that can include controlling another person's access to their support system, sometimes family and friends, sometimes larger community, sometimes money and resources, sometimes healthcare, which I know we're going to talk about today, sometimes, access to their jobs, access to their transportation. We know that this control can take many, many different forms, sometimes emotional, verbal, sometimes physical. Of course, as society continues to evolve and change, the ways that a person can exert control also continue to evolve. So we're seeing much more online abuse and harassment. We're seeing, much more economic abuse. Things like credit scores are very important, loans, jobs, the way we live. So really, really, unfortunately, a lot of insidious ways for a person who's choosing to harm another to exert control over their partner. Unfortunately, inter-partner violence in this country is very, very common. It affects millions of people each year. Looking at the most recent CDC estimate, they've said it affects about 12 million people each year. And unfortunately, we know that number is actually much, much higher because those are just people who are choosing to report and choosing to share their experience. So unfortunately, very common.
Yeah, I think that's, again, one of those things that reporting means you have to know that you experienced it. And especially when I was younger, the ways domestic violence was talked about was very focused on physical violence. There wasn't this broader understanding of like the full range of topics that fall under intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So I did not come to understand it, like I said earlier, until I started doing this work and learning more about it. So that means like I would have never considered myself one of those people. So I wouldn't have reported if I was ever asked. And so I can definitely see how those numbers get skewed and are low when it comes to self-reporting, particularly.
Absolutely. And that's always a great reason to check out the resources at the hotline. You can find us at thehotline.org. And you can always call or chat or text us. I know you're going to include our number, but I can just say it out loud for the lines. It's 1-800-799-7233, which is 1-800-799-SAFE. You can always chat us at thehotline.org, and you can even text us if that is your preferred method of communication. You can just text START to 88788. And you should not feel like you're grappling with something serious or something you are able to identify what's happening to you to reach out to us. You can ask about, what's happening in your relationship. We can talk about healthy behaviors. Our advocates are highly trained. They're trauma informed. They're fantastic. I love working with them. And, the core of what we do, and they're there for anyone who calls just seeking information, maybe just curious. And it doesn't have to be a survivor themselves. Sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's family, sometimes it feels like it's a person who's engaging in bad behavior. Everyone is welcome to reach out. And I definitely, definitely recommend using us as a resource. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, this just makes me think of like this ties into like my other favorite topic, and that's comprehensive sexuality education and like the importance of teaching about healthy relationships in comprehensive sexuality education and how rare that is, right?
Yeah. How would we know?
Yeah.
How would we know?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's focus on today's topic, and that's reproductive coercion. So maybe we should spend a little bit of time talking about what that is and what it looks like.
Sure. So I know you're using the term reproductive coercion, but it's also often interchanged with reproductive abuse, reproductive violence. But again, it's involving those behaviors that are intended to maintain, again, power and control in a relationship related in particular to reproductive health. So that can include explicit attempts to impregnate someone against their will, to control the outcome of a pregnancy, however that person desires, even coercing a partner into sexual behavior that they may or may not want to do. We know the range of sexual activity is broad, so there's many, many things that someone can try to convince or manipulate or intimidate someone into doing. It can even be interfering with contraceptive methods. It can be canceling appointments. It could be even going to appointments and just being there. Unfortunately, there are so many different ways. If a person is choosing to harm someone else and control them, many, many ways that they can also use existing systems and reproductive health to unfortunately control someone.
Yeah, I have to say, this is not something that, even working in this field, like, didn't come top of my mind, like, thinking of intimate partner violence and domestic violence, and like I should clearly know better, um to know that this is part of that. So I think it's really important that to talk about it and to kind of get that understanding of what it looks like and how it relates to reproductive health decisions.
Yeah, again, I think it's hard to know. The connections aren't always straightforward, but I think a principle that has been really central to our work is, central to living a life free from violence is an individual's ability to control their life, including their safety, their healing, whether someone is choosing to leave an abusive relationship or harmful relationship, or whether they're trying to make decisions about, what sorts of relationships they want to engage in and people they want in their lives. The ability to control their own body is really central to that. And we don't always think about that, but it can also mean the difference between living a life free of violence and potentially being tied to someone who's choosing to cause them harm. And those restrictions on access to reproductive health, whether it's free and legal and safe abortions, or whether it's birth control, or whether it's even reproductive planning or having health professionals to talk about all of these things that unfortunately a lot of people are not educated on and don't have access to in the day-to-day parts of their lives, is really valuable in terms of living freely and living safely, and also living free from violence.
Okay, I think the one thing that prompted this conversation today is that you've seen a change in this post-Dobbs. So what are y'all seeing?
Yes, so we have been looking at reproductive abuse and coercion more, kind of even before the Dobbs case. We always see trends, unfortunately, reflected in our lives, and whether that's day-to-day events. Sometimes you see stuff in the media. Sometimes people are just really impacted by like the affordable housing crisis. Then sometimes, as different states were thinking about abortion restrictions, reproductive specific pieces of legislation, bills, all of that. People contact us to talk about those experiences. And unfortunately, the really awful thing that we see is abusive partners and those who engage in harmful behavior will use any tool in their toolbox to control their partner. So even the threat of these restrictions is a fantastic tool of intimidation and power control. So the hotline has actually seen a 98% increase in survivors mentioning reproductive coercion as part of their experience in the 1 year since the Dobbs decision, as compared to the year before. So much, much more. And I think to that point too, people are learning much more about the connections, and people are unfortunately living the connection and then also reaching out for support. So some really, really challenging stories that, are being told by individuals reaching out and reported by our advocates.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that we have originally talked about this on the podcast was when we talked about the turnaway study, and that showed people who were turned away from accessing wanted abortions were more likely to stay with abusive partners. And so it's all connected, right? So even if this isn't reproductive coercion on the form of the partner per se, it still leads people to stay in an abusive relationship when they weren't able to get access to the care they wanted.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, we see all sorts of things on the lines. Some stories that have really stuck with me are about, someone called and shared that they had an unplanned pregnancy, and their boyfriend was so mad at them and accused them of purposely screwing up contraception, engaging in violence against them, and telling them that they were forced to get an abortion, and scheduled the appointment for them. Another caller shared, a younger caller, again, our services are completely free. anonymous and confidential. So the only information that we have is what people choose to share. And sometimes people don't choose to share anything. This caller identified as a younger person, 18 years old, and they were in an abusive partnership with someone who was much, much older. And she hadn't told anyone that she was pregnant because she knew that it was tying her to a potentially abusive partner. And she was in a state where access to abortion is restricted. So, in a really, really tough, complicated situation in terms of not having the financial resources to find safety elsewhere. And then other things that we hear that are generally just terrifying in the world are, that interference with contraception, sabotaging birth control. Sometimes partners throw birth control away. We've heard poking holes at condoms. We've heard destroying condoms. We've heard infertility used as an excuse for, not using condoms, forcing someone to engage in sex when they don't want to. All of that stuff that is really terrifying to think about. But when people just cannot access the care that they need, it just limits the choices that they can make for their life, again, interfering with their safety and really limiting their options.
Yeah, and I feel like I've also heard stories of, these restrictions or bans being used as a weapon by abusers where they're threatening to report people for self-managing or any number of things where they think they're violating the law and using law enforcement as another way to abuse their partners.
Yeah, absolutely. People get creative. And I think that is the terrifying thing about living in a world where people want to exert control over each other in a relationship, is that people will use whatever tools that they have available to them. And unfortunately, this kind of mirrors some of the issues with domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and even relationship abuse to begin with, right? Shame, stigma, societal views, what people's opinions are, all impact the ability of someone to come forward, to share their experience, to be believed. And we know that with things like abortion, a variety of different aspects of reproductive health and reproductive justice, those things include shame, stigma. People aren't always comfortable sharing their experience, even comfortable getting help, all of those things. So then it makes it even much more complicated when their options are restricted in terms of what's available to them.
And it also makes me think of again, going back to that broader world of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. If your partner is abusing you with economic abuse, like then you don't have the money to access the care you need. You may not be able to
Exactly.
travel to get the care you need if you have to travel very far. Like these are all interconnected in many, many ways.
That is such a good point. I don't even think people think about the economic impact of these restrictions. Financial abuse happens in all of these different ways, but ultimately includes someone's access to the financial resources that someone else has. So if someone can't access their own fund, can't access their own job, if their partner is interfering with their capacity to work, that can result in really, really severe constraints, not only in their ability to seek reproductive health care, our ability to seek abortion, but also then the ability to potentially have a child, which is unfortunately still very expensive, and then also care for that child in the future. And it implicates things like childcare, it implicates things like work. And then a forced pregnancy can mean continued dependence on a harmful partner, because someone may not have the financial freedom and the resources to do anything else other than just survive with them and then potentially now a new child in that situation.
Yeah. And like then that person being tied to their life for a long time, even if they are able to separate, they still have this child.
Yeah.
It it's long term, right? Like this all just feels terrible. Um what what do we need to happen to fix this? I mean, there are like so many ways we could take that question, right? Like there's the abortion fixes, there's abuse, but like how do we try to end this, right? Like I feel like there's been this talk about really making efforts to stop domestic violence for so long, but what needs to happen?
Yeah, I really think about well, I think about it in many pieces also. It's overwhelming. We could be here
Right.
for, we could write a thesis on this. But I think thinking about some of that shame and stigma is a really, really easy way for anyone and everyone who interacts with any other human beings to help shift the societal narrative on violence, on reproductive justice, and reproductive health. The more people that are comfortable having these discussions, learning about what's healthy, what's not healthy, educating others, is a really, really powerful intervention and also prevention, for things that might happen in the future. And then building upon that, there are a lot of fixes that potentially need to happen around the whole country. Sometimes federal level changes take a long time. We're seeing a lot of state level protections happening. These are things that affect pretty much everyone we know. So a really necessary thing to get involved in. I think people sometimes aren't familiar with the ways that they can do their civic engagement by getting involved in their state and local governments. Things are even specific to their jurisdictions, their towns, their communities. People pass, there's cities in the country that have paid leave and the state doesn't. So thinking things can go on the really, really granular level. And I think people think about it as a huge, overwhelming issue, but sometimes we need to be looking at what we could do on a micro level and in the spaces that are accessible to us. So it doesn't need to be a huge, overwhelming lift for everyone. And that huge, overwhelming lift, unfortunately, is a responsibility of a lot of others. And there are a lot of great advocates and organizations and people, around the whole country who are really, really working to try to fix this from a legislative standpoint, from a policy standpoint, and all of that stuff. But, the future of that is unknown. So it really takes all of us kind of uniting against principles that we really believe in, which should be living a life free from violence, which also means access to all of these resources, and how we do that day to day.
Yeah. And I really, as someone who works at the federal level a lot,
Mm-hmm.
watching the fights over the Violence Against Women Act the last several years has just been enraging of
Yeah.
how it got politicized when it's just trying to expand access to care to all people who need it, and it's just very frustrating. So there are so many things happening on so many levels, like you said, that it's just really important we're making sure that everybody has access to the care they need. Um,
I feel like it's often said that the opposite of despair is advocacy. So, sometimes it's good to center yourself there. I do think that working on a federal level, sometimes things can feel not only overwhelmingly exhausting and sad, but just like the needle will not shift. But I think what really gives me hope for the future is all of, frankly, the state and local and micro advocacy that's happening, people who are helping individual survivors, the people who are providing that individualized support. I litigated very early on in my career, and it was a very, one-on-one sort of interaction, but, helping someone find freedom and safety, is worth it, even if it's just one person. So I think it's good to remember that, although it doesn't feel like that in this environment right now.
yeah, and I also feel hope. I feel like the conversations that young people are having are just getting at this issue so much, this more expansive view, this better understanding of what intimate partner violence looks like, better than for sure my generation did when I was their age. So it is hopeful to see that there is this broader understanding happening and the connections are being made in better ways. So, even as it feels like a lot of things stay the same, the conversation is progressing in a lot of helpful ways.
Yeah. And I think related to that too, I would shout out our healthy relationships project called Love is Respect. We have a whole other helpline for those who are curious about that. But we also work with the youth council, that they're so incredible. And I think it's just so amazing to hear perspective from young people about their experiences and what it looks like to live authentically as yourself and live safely and live freely. And I think there's a lot of lessons for that to be learned by all of us and also by policymakers and by advocates and all that in terms of what we take to try to fix things and what we offer to everyone in terms of, their life and their freedom and their safety and their well-being.
Okay, I feel like we already kind of touched on this, but I always like to wrap up with what can our audience do? Like, what specific things can the audience do to take action and help on these issues?
Yeah, I think that unfortunately, since a lot of these issues are tied to economics, it's donate to your favorite local charities, donate to your favorite national charities. But other than that, like I said, civic engagement can sometimes feel really overwhelming. You feel like a drop in the bucket, but it is elected officials' responsibilities to be responsive to their constituents. And I don't think that people bother their elected officials enough, both on the local level and the state level and the federal level. So, I think that's really important. And I think the other thing too is to share, amongst yourselves, to your friends, to your families, to your support groups. Maybe it's a good book club topic. Maybe it's a good community service project topic. As we bring more light to this, I think shifting the narrative is a really, really important part of what it takes to help change these restrictions and really help offer people options. I think what is really an interesting highlight to this work is that in violence, in reproductive justice, there's no size fits all solution to anything. And unfortunately, a lot of what we offer from the policy level, from the legal level, even from the resource level to, the benefits that we offer are often one size fits all. But I think that is something that we can all unite around, is that people just need options for whatever they're going through. And something that we can do is rattle around fussing about how people need that to the people who can make a difference. And hopefully we'll see those changes.
These are all wonderful. And I think I would add one, and that's one of the things we've talked about on the podcast before, is the importance role that abortion storytellers have played. And the same goes true in domestic violence, right? As people shared their stories, the broader public was able to understand what is happening better. So if you would like to, if you feel you're in a safe place, I think being able to share your story, even if it's just like little bits of it or parts of it, or even if it's just claiming that you're a survivor, if that's a word that works for you, like finding a way to participate, if that is something you want to do. Like, I always took like small steps forward in mine, and I think you would be saddened, happy, surprised. Like, there's so many emotions of finding you're not alone. There's probably a lot of people who may be in a similar situation or were in a similar situation. And there is a bit of a sense of community from connecting with those people. So again, this is if this is something you feel up to, would like to do, I think there's a lot of support out there.
And I would just support the power of storytelling. I actually got to interview Dr. Judith Herman yesterday, who wrote a book called Truth and Repair. It's all about trauma and healing. And she talks so much about how acknowledgement is part of that trauma process and also healing. We know that storytelling, sometimes one story to the right person can create the change that a gazillion advocates knocking on doors have been trying to make. I think we see that all the time. And I think there's power in stories, sharing that to the people who can make change, but also just sharing that with each other. So I really, really am glad you highlighted that point.
Yeah. And if you're not up for sharing your story, it's okay.
Yeah.
Do what is right for you. Well, Marium, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed talking to you.
It was great. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, y'all, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Marium. It was wonderful to talk to her about what they are seeing on the hotline right now And again, if you need someone to talk to, reach out to the hotline.org. You can find more information on their website. You can chat on their website, or you can call 1-800-799-SAFE if you need someone to talk to. And with that, I will see you all in 2 weeks. If you have any questions, comments, or topics you would like us to cover, always feel free to shoot me an email. You can reach me at Jennie, Jennie, at reprosfightback.com, or you can find us on social media. We're at Repros Fight Back on Facebook and Twitter, or Repros FB on Instagram. If you love our podcast and want to make sure more people find it, take the time to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Or if you want to make sure to support the podcast, you can also donate on our website at reprosfightback.com. Thanks all.